commission members introduce themselves, state the occupation, beginning with Ms. Hornsby.
Ann Hornsby, attorney.
Eddie Pugh, retired.
John Smith, Deputy Director, Environmental Services.
Bill Wright, business owner. There are sign-up sheets outside for public comment. If you did not sign up, you will still be given an opportunity to speak during the public comment portion of the agenda. This time, I'd like to discuss the procedures. The commission will take up items in order of the agenda. The commission will receive a presentation from staff regarding zoning text changes necessitated through testing, along with minor changes and updates to the proposed zoning map that they will have identified between the creation and present day. The commission will vote to accept or reject these changes for final recommendation to the City Council later this summer. This is not the final vote on these items. The final vote is expected in July of 2024. After the staff presentation, the floor will be open to public comment. Staff will assist in reviewing the comments submitted online. Others in attendance will be welcomed after online comments are reviewed. Online comments are separated into two categories: comments of support and comments of concern. Comments of support generally do not require commission action in terms of a vote. For comments of concern, the commission will decide whether to accept the proposed change or leave as is. Individuals wishing to express support or opposition will be given 3 minutes to speak. Only the Planning and Zoning Commission can grant a specified time extension to an individual. Public comment will be received, the floor closed to public comment, and the commission will open discussion among themselves, reserving the opportunity to vote to accept or reject any proposed changes for final consideration at the review meetings that will take place this year. These proceedings are video recorded and broadcast live. All public comments should be made at the podium into the microphone. Please first state your name and address for the record. Jurisdiction. Regarding zoning text amendments, sections 11-52-76 of the Code of Alabama states, the legislative body of such municipality shall provide for the manner in which such regulations and restrictions and the boundaries of such districts shall be determined, established, and enforced from time to time, amended, supplemented, or changed, and may adopt such ordinance as may be necessary to carry into effect and make effective the provisions of this article. Planning and Zoning Commission serves as a recommending body to the legislative body. While the zoning text amendments will be considered in pieces, they will not be enforced until the full zoning text is adopted and the zoning map changes implemented. In layman's terms, if there is a vote at any point to recommend changes, they will not be enforced on any property until the City Council adopts the zoning text and zoning map changes formally through many public hearings. This time, I would ask, do any members of the commission have any conflicts of interest or possible conflicts for any topics on the agenda for discussion this evening? If so, please state for the record. Having heard none, with that, we will begin.
Well, good evening, Commission. I know this is twice in 1 week that you get to be at City Hall, and it does not go unnoticed. So I appreciate that so much out of y'all, and know that there is light at the end of this tunnel. Let's talk a little bit really quickly. Of course, as per usual, our meeting expectations. Steering committee members, if you're present tonight, please note your role in that process. Simply state that you are a member of the steering committee if you are providing public comment. For my Planning and Zoning Commission members, remember that you've had time to review the draft code, the draft map ahead of the meeting, and just ask questions if you don't understand, and we'll look for an expedited process this evening. For everyone, of course, we will begin at 5 p.m. and at 7 p.m., and if we don't get finished with something, we will roll that into our next regularly scheduled meeting. We'll utilize a 3-minute timer for all parties for public comments, and if you have someone who you would like to hear more from, only you as the Planning Commission can grant more time. And staff will be managing the flow of the meeting for efficiency, and you have seen that from meeting to meeting. Let's talk a little bit, of course, for those who are just tuning in this evening or those who this is their first meeting for Framework, how we made that future land use character map and how we created that draft zoning map as well. For our framework meeting, framework generally, of course, We had a plethora of participation by the public, and we are so thankful for that. So this was not a plan that was made in secrecy. This was a plan that was made very publicly, even during COVID. Our steering committee members, and you can see those that were a part of this, and specific to this evening, we get districts 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in this map tonight. So we really hit that great cross-section of the city. And as we created that future land use character map, remember that it's not a mandate for development or rezoning. We are simply using it as a policy guide to be implemented through zoning regulations and public and private investment processes. Remember that multiple zoning districts can be utilized for any one future land use character type. Our future land use and character map categories that you are very familiar with: mixed use areas, neighborhood residential areas, institutional, conservation, etc. And so for this portion of the city of Tuscaloosa specifically, this is the future land use map. And you can see it stretches all the way from the 297 bridge, I just dropped the name that we always call that bridge, 297 today, and where McWright's Ferry Road will tie in all the way down to I-359 and I-20. So the zoning map, of course, was created by staff. We have had the luxury of having the future land use character map created by our professionals and the steering committee, but we as staff get to use our professional expertise and judgment along with the character map, our existing zoning and current land uses, to assign zoning categories to each parcel, parcel by parcel, bit by bit. And so we're using these meetings to go through those and to make corrections where needed, and these special called meetings especially. Our new zoning districts you see on the screen in front of you, and at this point I hope that we are very familiar with them. Our residential districts, institutional, industrial, planned development, and commercial districts, and you will get a smattering of all of those this evening as well. Really quickly, and we have been doing this, and we have promised you, and we have promised the group to talk about various and sundry bits that we need to bring back and take a little bit more of a deep dive into. And I know at the meeting last month, landscape and buffer standards was a bit of a topic of discussion, and so we've had a chance as staff to take a look at some possible fixes, because we recognize a couple of items in there might not have quite sat right. Our landscape and buffer standards, of course, are not purely aesthetical. They are intended to help encourage native plants, help with stormwater runoff, and also make that buffer in between different kinds of land uses. So our current standards that you see on the screen in front of you, you've got basically two buffer options, a type A that's opaque and a type B that is semi-opaque. There's also a type C that we're not touching right now, so we didn't put it on the screen in front of you. And you see on the table to the right those buffer types. And so basically how we will utilize this is on the left-hand column, we'll say, all right, I've got a single-family home in the existing land use type, and I am proposing a commercial use adjacent to that. So our household uses living type, and then our commercial type, and just like any good grid, we track it together and see that my options are type B, semi-opaque. So if I'm the developer, I decide that I'm going to do option 1, which is 4 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 60 shrubs per 100 linear feet. Or I can do 20 feet and a wall. So that's how the buffer standards will be utilized. And you could have a household living use adjacent to an industrial use. And I think this is where the biggest hang-up happened. And we acknowledge that very full, and we've got a great fix for it too. But when you track that over and you see that your option is A, and that one of those A options for an industrial use adjacent to a single-family residential home would be 20 feet and a wall, that starts to get a little bit problematic. especially when it comes to how our current buffers are established. So what we are proposing is an industrial buffer that would go in as maybe a type I, and it would be 50 feet of a minimum width adjacent to all residential or multifamily uses. It's what we have today, and it works very well. And what it also does, and I'll go back a slide really quickly, is what you see is industrial uses at the top. But not only is it industrial uses, it's correctional facilities, railroad terminals, truck terminals, and major utilities. So a lot of times truck terminals will end up in a highway commercial zone. And so you may have a highway commercially zoned piece of property, but it's a trucking terminal. Well, this allows that 50-foot buffer to be between the neighborhood and something where semis may park all night and purr, as I like to put it. So it makes it seem a lot nicer. They're just purring. So we're proposing that amendment and adding the industrial buffer. What we're also proposing is to update that type B buffer to match our existing dimensional requirements. So today, you see right now, type B is 30 feet in option 1 and 20 feet in option 2. What we are proposing is increasing that to 35 feet in option 1, which is consistent with today's standards. And option 2, Commission, you could choose to leave it at 20 feet or drop it to 15 feet, which is current. Today we have 3 options for commercial adjacent to residential. You either have 35 feet of strict buffer, you have 15 feet plus a wall, and I'm really good at writing on this, or 10 feet with a wall and parking between the building and the residence. This option goes away completely because what that option doesn't take into account, again, is the idea of putting parking between your building and the neighborhood and cars parking there and purring or making music or making loud noises. So it really doesn't meet the intent of those buffers. So I think your best option for option 2 is either 15 feet consistent with today's standards or keeping it at 20 feet, which is what was proposed. Do you all have any feelings one way or another on that?
I'm going to lean more towards the 20 feet.
You'll lean more towards 20?
I think we need the 20
Okay.
just because of the fact that it's always been our rub with joining neighborhoods is
Yep.
that they need buffer.
Right.
And I'd rather be more than less.
Right.
Totally.
I'm not for decrease.
No.
20?
20.
And y'all feel good about the industrial buffer?
Yeah.
Yes.
Commission is north-south on industrial buffer. We are good and prefer 20 feet for the semi-opaque change. And that's an easy fix for us
So
because
does it
that's,
stay at 35 or 30?
I would put it at 35 to make it consistent with what everyone expects today. Dropping it down to 30,
I think that sounds good.
dropping it to 30 just, in my opinion, doesn't make sense. Do y'all feel that that's where you want to be?
Yes, and I like
Yes.
the consistency.
Same. Consistency is good. Okay, so really quickly, just to sum it up, what we would look at is also there's a couple of places where townhomes are consistently added in with your more multi-family products when townhomes really are and they will continue to be a single-family product. So you'll see on the screen in front of you that we are removing townhomes from some of those lists and adding in to the top square, it's all single-family residences, townhomes, and duplexes, what those standards would be, and then just amending the rest of the chart to reflect the proposed changes.
Good? Yeah.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Easy enough, y'all. All right. Mr. Pons. is going to walk you through the zoning map.
All right, so we're in the Alberta, Midtown, Greensboro area, as Ashley has mentioned already. So outlined here, this is the area that we're talking about tonight. So pretty large area that includes District 5, really just a lot of the districts. District 5, a little bit of District 6, District 7, and 2. Here is the zoning districts as they sit today. The future land use map, and then the proposed zoning. So the proposed updates that we're making as staff, as we kind of always do after we meet with stakeholders and really discuss in depth people's properties and what we might have not identified initially in our first draft. So this is on 4th Street East and 30th Avenue East. This is the Elements, so it's close to Juanita Drive, where that Habitat for Humanity kind of project is over there in Alberta area. So we initially identified it as SFR4. We are proposing it as MR2. It just better fits what exists today and the way that that was developed, which was unique for the new MX zoning districts, so it's more appropriate for MR2. South of University Boulevard East, so these are also in Alberta, kind of on that corner of Kicker Road, where Kicker Road meets University Boulevard. So these are the St. John, St. Croix, I believe, those stacked flats type development. So MR2 is more.
Sorry, I can't tell where you're talking about.
Oh, sorry. So these right here, this is a lot of the vacant property area today. I believe, isn't this close to where Summer Snow is, right?
Yeah, it's the new KED Plasma Center and the gas station are in this area.
Right.
And we're just going from one brown to another brown.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same situation as the previous one where we identified it as MFR. Really, MR2 is more appropriate for the style development that currently exists. And then 16th Street and Lake Avenue. So these are Myers Flats. So this is just on the western side of Forest Lake, right behind what used to be Who's Q. Now it's Homewood Bagel Company, which would be right here. So this is 15th Street, Homewood Bagel Company, and then you've got Forest Lake. Y'all familiar with where we're at? We're going from, again, another brown to another brown, so MFR to MR2, which is...
Zach, and these changes we're making, y'all are recommending, since they are changing, does the property owners of those have, they're in
Yes.
agreement with those?
So Mr. Clay Hudson is here. He's the property owner for these, but also, we spoke with him before these meetings after we had initially done the draft and kind of talked through what exists today, what the density is today, and what would be more appropriate would be MR2 versus MFR, what we identified initially.
I just want to make sure that we're not making
Oh,
changes
yeah, no,
without-
any of these changes that we're proposing, we've definitely talked with the property owners,
Okay.
and they're the ones that are involved in it.
Great, thank you.
Great question. And then this, again, is going from MFR to MR2. So this is on Hargrove Road, pretty close to McFarland Boulevard, vacant piece of property today. There's a gas station on the corner. Anajitos, I think is what it's called. It's like a really good Mexican restaurant. It's right over here. Pet Supplies Plus, that kind of area right there. So again, MFR to MR2. And then this is on the opposite sides of the eastern side of Forest Lake. And this is where Freddy's is. So the way that Freddy's was developed is a little unique where you can see, so Freddy's is sitting here, but this is kind of part of their property as well. And so it's more appropriate to keep that GC component because I believe they are deeded together as well. So if they're sold together. So right now, if we were able to pull up an aerial, it's the parking lot for Freddy's. And then one more change that we're proposing. This is a retention pond. you'd be familiar with it if you drove past it off Juanita Drive, behind kind of the gateway area. It's vacant today. It's never going to be able to be developed. The city owns it. So we're going to ISP for that one instead of MR2. And so now we will move into the public comments. So we did receive a few public comments prior to the meeting that we'll go through. Just a reminder for everyone, 3-minute timer will be used, invisible to all parties. Only the PZC members can grant a specified time extension, so once that timer's over, you guys can grant that extension if you feel so inclined. And then all comments requiring a decision by the commission will be voted on as they're presented. So tonight we are, as we've been doing, voting after we discuss these. So first off, this is a public comment from
Kendall, I'm sorry that I took
Kendall,
it down
yeah.
too, Zach.
Kendall Mollenhauer in support. So he's supplied a lot of support comments for us, which we're really thankful for. So this is another one we appreciate. So the comment is, this is Juanita Drive over by the new Pop Stroke development. The comment is in support. You see that he thinks that it should stay commercial, university commercial district. The whole block bounded by Julia Tutwiler Drive, Helen Keller Boulevard, and Harper Lee Drive would be a good spot for a mixed-use town center similar to cul-de-sac Tempe. Such development, along with a complete redesign of Helen Keller Boulevard from an overbuild strode car sewer to a multimodal street that accommodates all road users, would make this area more attractive rather than a place you only go because you have to go somewhere over here. So he likes the kind of multimodal, pedestrian-friendly type aspect that UC allows.
So Commission, I'm just going to type in, no comment needed on this.
We got some more.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
The next comment is on 1500 30th Street. And we as staff actually put that one in this afternoon because we noticed another item that needed correction.
So this is in between Greensboro and Lurleen. So it is close to the Salvation Army, right there. It's really, okay, Tuscaloosa Blue is there as well, by Harmon Park, Rosedale Park. So today it exists as, sorry, I should just read the comment. So this is a comment of concern. We put it in as it should be light industrial district. The comment is this is a 3,000 square foot warehouse. Property should be zoned IL. If you drive past there, it's pretty self-explanatory as to like the way the building is sitting, the way it's built. Should be light industrial rather than general commercial.
And we were able to talk with the property owner this afternoon.
Yes.
So Commission, if you are okay with making that change, this is one where we have to start voting or making motions or.
I mean, it's staff and the property owner in agreement. I'm in agreement.
Do we need to vote?
We'll vote, though. You want a voice vote or you need a roll call vote?
Voice
vote?
is fine.
Okay, all those in favor of the submitted request change, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, ayes have it.
All right, the next comment is on the Kennedy Foster House at 1842 25th Avenue. And Mr. Dempsey is here this evening as well.
Ashley, will you circle
Yeah.
where we're talking about so I can keep up? with it?
Yes, sir, and Mr. Pons may need to change the color since that red is not showing up very well.
Okay.
So where that little dot is there, and I'm sure y'all are familiar with it when you're driving north. It's an old house that just sits there. Yep, there you go. Really beautiful. Today, so I'll just read this comment. This comment is from Mr. Dempsey, Stephen Dempsey, voicing concern. We are proposing it as MR1. He is suggesting it go to multifamily residential district. So this comment is that the property has been used as 3 apartments, so apartment units since around 1960. This use is conforming today in the R4 district and would be non-conforming in MR1. MFR would make the use conforming. He's registered this on the National and State Historic Register, so this house is on the National and State Historic Register, and he has no plans to redevelop this property / historic structure.
Are there any restrictions on national registers and
No, sir. National Register properties don't have the same protections that locally designated properties do. Like our Historic Preservation Commission does not dictate what happens with that structure.
What about state properties?
The state doesn't even mandate it.
Okay.
And Mr. Dempsey's here if you want to kind of ask him some more questions if you'd like.
I mean, again, if this is his request and staff has no concerns, is there concerns from a staff level?
No concern, really.
I mean, it's,
Well, if it's consistent with the current use, I think that
yeah,
makes
that's kind of
sense.
where I mean,
So the only use, or the only zones that would allow a triplex of sorts or an apartment building would be multifamily residential or MR2. MR2 in this location is not appropriate. We can say that with certainty. The material standards and other items and just the surrounding area would put it out of place would something ever happen to the structure. So multifamily residential is probably your best bet if you, as a commission, are inclined to make that change.
I move we adopt the change.
second on that?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye, those opposed? Ayes have it.
All right, the next few comments are from Richard Henry, and we're going to start with 105 39th Street East.
And we were able to speak to Mr. Henry beforehand. I don't believe he's here.
No.
So
I'm
this
sorry.
comment is from Mr. Henry, comment of concern. He thinks that it should be SFR, or I don't believe that he thinks this should be SFR1. It's identified as, we're identifying it as SFR1. His comment is, this is an existing 10-unit, 2-story apartment complex. So just a little background for this specific property. Yeah, I'll mark it here. So you can kind of see from the outline, it is an apartment complex today. However, it is non-conforming today. All of this property that you see that we're essentially proposing as SFR1 is R1 today. And so it does meet kind of what's going on in this area already, even though it is a non-conforming, or even though it is an apartment structure, it's still non-conforming today.
So is it staff's position that it should stay? Or is there advice that it should stay zoned as is so that were it to be redeveloped, it would be more appropriate?
Yes, as staff, we identified this property as we were assigning and had a lively discussion about what to do with it. And at the end of the day, it's had some property maintenance issues generally, and were something to happen to it, it should come back in keeping with the character of the area. So SFR1 is most appropriate in our minds. Is that what y'all would like to do? I know there wasn't really a recommendation out of this comment, but if you'd like to keep it as SFR1.
I mean, we want to avoid spot zoning for things like this, so I mean, I think we should revert back to what the best and most common use is in the area, so I think it stays SFR1.
I agree.
Agree?
Yeah, I agree.
All right, we are going to move over to James I. Harrison Jr. Parkway East. I'm going to tag this one first, Zach.
All right, so this is a comment of concern. He believes that it should be neighborhood commercial. His comment is that he owns this property and it is a general office that houses the Alabama Department of Mental Health. Just need to make sure that general office is allowed in this industrial district. If not, it needs to be changed to allow for general office. We did confirm that the use does work in this zoning district that we're proposing.
And I spoke with Mr. Henry at about 3:30 this afternoon, and we talked about all of his comments this afternoon, and so he is comfortable with the fact that keeping it IL will maintain the use as well.
No comment needed then.
So this would be if y'all would like to vote to stay IL. And this is a similar concern from Mr. Henry, neighborhood commercial. This property is part of 1305 James Harrison. Comment on the parcel applies to this one as well, so.
Stay aye.
Do they need to do a vote for both of those? It wasn't really a suggestion to move to.
Wasn't, yeah, it wasn't
Yeah.
suggested, it was concerned, but wasn't asking for a change.
Right.
I think we're good.
We will move over to property. So this comment we found out was on the wrong piece of property. So let's have Mr. Pons maybe read this, and I'll pull up the correction on the screen.
So this is again, Richard Henry voicing concern. He thinks that the zoning should be multifamily residential. The statement is, I already have 11 units on this 0.73 acre parcel. That's just barely over the 15 per acre limit. I just want to make sure that what I already have is still allowed. We are also adjacent to MFR, so it should make sense. And so we'll go to that property just to clarify. So yeah, this is the one, right?
Yes.
So this is the property that he's referring to. Can you go back to the, maybe where we would see it on this map? Yeah. So you can see that multifamily residential is all this kind of brown, darker brown color. And so as we talked with Mr. Henry, we don't see any issues with it going to multifamily as well. Today, in the draft, we identified it as MR1, but we would be okay with it going to MFR.
Staff and petitioner are property owner in agreement to move to MFR. Correct?
That's right, yes, sir.
Okay. Have a motion on that in a second.
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Ayes have it.
And you'll see in the comment, I am clarifying the address is 1120 19th
Right.
Street, so. All right, commission, we've got one extra. Nope, he doubled up on that one. All right, and just really quickly, let's click on this comment. We don't want to leave it out, but we tried to contact Ms. Phelps a couple of different times. Her comment is one of concern. This is Target. And her comment is one of concern, thinks the zoning should be single-family residential, close to Woodland Forest neighborhood. A small 20-foot buffer would be a big problem for our established family homes. I reached out to Ms. Phelps a couple of times. I've not been able to hear back from her to find out where her comment should have been. And so hopefully when we find that out, as we do our wrap-up meetings, we'll be able to bring something back. But I didn't want to have this outstanding comment there and y'all asking, what is this? So.
I believe that brings us to Springbrook, is that
Yeah,
correct?
Springbrook is last.
So there's a couple of comments on the Springbrook property down McFarland from Ms. Barth and Ms. Smith. And this was, what year was this,
2017.
2017, where a lot of this was discussed, and Ms. Kreitz was here during that time, so I'm going to turn it over to her to give you a little bit more history on this property and help guide y'all through this.
All right, Commission, just before we have the comments, I know Springbrook was one of those cases that you as a planning commission and city council battled with from about 2015 to 2017. And so just really quickly, I think it's important to talk about that brief history before we get into the comments, just so any of our new Planning Commission members, folks watching, we're all singing off the same song sheet tonight. So there were 3 rezoning cases that happened for the Springbrook property. Z0615, where the request was from R2 to BN only. The Planning Commission in 2015 did not recommend approval of that rezoning. It went forward to City Council, was continued for about 6 months, I think, and then they withdrew it at the City Council level. Resubmitted in 2016 towards the end of the year and requested R2 to BN and put a PUD condition on that rezoning. So can BN on the condition that it be a PUD. And by the time it got to the Planning Commission, they withdrew it at the Planning Commission meeting. So it didn't go any further. There was no Planning Commission vote. So in 2017, it came back with the same request, R2 to BN, conditioned on the development of the property as a planned unit development. The Planning and Zoning Commission did not recommend approval at that meeting of that rezoning. The council adopted the rezoning under the condition that it be developed as a PUD, and you'll see that ordinance number that happened in July of 2017. We had a lot of rezonings in 2017, and I think one of the hardest things that we were doing at the time was that we were, and I say we, the collective we, because I was in the trenches with you, but there were a lot of PUD conditions placed on rezonings. And that has become problematic as we are in the middle of this process because those PUD conditions are tied to that BN that it becomes developed as a PUD. Well, what happens when it's not BN anymore? And you're not requiring, that PUD condition just goes away with it because our zoning should be strong enough to make sure that you don't need those PUD conditions anymore. I think it's important to note, especially as we discuss Springbrook this evening, that the preliminary site plan was provided for Springbrook. We saw it during the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. We saw it during the City Council meeting, but it did not tie that developer to constructing. So those nice pictures with the landscape buffer and the 4 or 5 bigger buildings that it showed could have been different as they came back with their planned unit development proposal. So those details would have been worked out through that PUD process, but one was never submitted. And then if one had been approved at some point in the past, it would have expired because construction never commenced. And that's section 24-163 that says a developer has a year after PUD approval to get under construction. And I know you saw one of those Monday night with Mr. Turner coming back to ask if he could have an extension. So for Springbrook this evening, one of the things that I think, and let's go back really quickly to talking about those PUD conditions, because you remember those conversations that were had about the Planning Commission level and probably even at the City Council level, because this was fairly tumultuous. There were a lot of conditions and agreements that were made between the developer and the neighborhood about uses, this, that, and the other. And through your zoning, you've taken care of a lot of those things. It may not be completely perfect, but limiting certain uses near residences, that's not something that exists in the current code. So BN today, you could have a tattoo shop right next to an R1 zone if those things were next to each other, but we've taken care of a lot of those things in the new zoning ordinance. Limitations there. There's also not neighborhood compatibility standards. No, that is the right term for it. But some height limitations as you get closer to neighborhoods and single-family residentially zoned and used properties, as well as your landscape and buffer standards. So just really quickly, Commission, this is, just as we get into the comments, your current zoning districts today, so the Springbrook neighborhood as a whole, prior to 2017 was zoned R2. The property in question tonight is going to be everything that, yellow is a bad choice, is going to be this property here. You see McFarland Boulevard and Springbrook sits just to the west of McFarland Boulevard. Albright Road runs here. Albright in this location south of Springbrook and running up to that intersection where there's a traffic light is a public street. And then at that traffic light running this way, it becomes a service road maintained by ALDOT. You've got your future land use and character map, and you'll remember some of these conversations happened during the creation of the future land use character map. The property was identified as corridor commercial adjacent to McFarland Boulevard, and we have assigned that as general commercial for the proposed zoning district. So I will sit down and we will read comments into the record for you. The first comment is from Joan Barth. You'll see it there on the Springbrook property. It's a comment of concern. I think the zoning should be neighborhood commercial district. When the property was rezoned from residential to BN, the city council put a condition that it be developed as a PUD. The PUD was offered as a way to reassure residents that promises that the developer made with respect to uses and site development were kept. There is no longer a PUD requirement in the new zoning. The GC zoning allows for uses that are incompatible with the promises made. The NC code is more consistent with expectations from these hearings. And Ms. Barth is here this evening if you have any questions for her or further commentary.
Talk about, and might be a good chance to bring up, do we have anything on the uses in the GC and the neighborhood commercial? Is there, you have the ability to pull those up?
We can get there.
I mean, just because, asking for they're talking about needing a change. I know you mentioned about how we've tried to clean up some of the commercial uses in certain districts, i.e. tattoo parlors or whatever. I think it'd be just helpful to see those different uses. And my question would be, a neighborhood commercial,
Yeah, it'd be nice to know how they compare.
yeah, how viable is that in certain areas and vice versa? So just see.
What was the tail end of that question? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just trying to understand the different uses of a GC
I'm
and
tracking.
ANC. If there's any
The
kind of,
corridor commercial versus the neighborhood.
right.
This is what
Got you.
we're looking for.
We're going to roll past, these are the residential uses, agriculture and residential uses. So we're going to scroll past those because I think the biggest topic of discussion is going to be on those commercial ones. So we'll scroll past institutional as well, even though some of those things, well, we'll stop here for a second because you do have some institutional uses. The difference is here, look in the middle of your screen, you've got GC and NC basically in the middle of your table here. And so animal shelter in a GC, community facility in both, daycare centers is in just GC. Got motorcycles
So
outside.
the corridor commercial is as a
GC.
GC.
Yes, ma'am.
Just making sure that's,
You've got private lodges or clubs as a special exception, public safety, religious institutions, hospitals are special exceptions. Medical or dental clinic is permitted in GC and a special exception in NC. And then you get down into minor utilities and cell towers. So let's keep rolling into the commercial uses. All right, so our commercial principal use table, we start off with kennels are permitted in GC, but special exception in NC. The same goes for pet grooming and veterinary clinics. You can see broadcasting studios, catering, conference or training centers only permitted in GC, not NC. Offices are permitted in both by right. Research and development is permitted in GC, special exception in NC. We are still working through bars and taverns, as well as brew pubs. But you can see coffee houses are permitted in GC and NC both. Gastropubs we're still working through. Quick service restaurants are permitted in GC, not in NC. Sit-down restaurants are in both, as well as wine bars. No bed and breakfasts in either. Hotels only in GC, not in NC. Event spaces are the same. Indoor recreation in both. Outdoor recreation in GC, but a special exception in NC. Theaters in GC, a drive-in theater in GC. Check cashing. So some of these are those limited uses that we can bounce into at the end too to talk about the distances that got written in. So check cashing is permitted in GC, but is not in NC. Convenience stores are permitted in both. A financial institution is in both. Funeral homes are permitted in GC, special exception in NC. Laundromat is permitted in both. Dry cleaning retail facilities, so not dry cleaning itself, but the pickup place is permitted in both. Liquor store is permitted in GC, but special exception in NC. Personal services are permitted in both. Pharmacy as well. We make a nursery/greenhouse, a special exception in NC, but permitted in GC. Large retail sales are permitted in GC. Medium retail sales as well, and then we allow small retail sales in NC, where they're not large and medium are not permitted. Self-service storage we have already fixed. That is actually not permitted in GC. We've corrected that in the last meeting. That is only permitted in HC. Sexually oriented businesses are special exceptions only in GC, and there are limitations to those as well. Tattoo establishments are only permitted in GC with limitations, tobacco and vape shops as well. Vehicle mounted or tent sheltered retail, automobile or car washes are permitted in GC but not NC. And then we bounce through to a what am I trying to say? A fuel service, a gas station, that's the word. Fuel stations are permitted in GC. Light vehicle repair ends up as a special exception in those districts. Light vehicle sales and rental, we have actually corrected that. That's not a GC situation. And ride hailing or taxi services permitted in GC but not NC. So let's talk a little bit really quickly about those limited uses, and I'm going to scroll to where I can find one of those so we can look at the limitations that we are building in, and we are going to come back to you, Commission, with expanded fixes for a lot of our what we'll call limited uses. So you can see here.
Ashley,
Yes,
can I
ma'am.
interrupt you for a minute?
No, absolutely.
So can you just explain the process for getting a specialty use?
A special exception? Yeah, Mr.
Well,
Pons.
I mean, the things that are permitted by right, and then there are ones that are permitted by special.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Pons.
And so what is the special
Yes, so
exception process?
similar to what we talked about last night with special exceptions, they have to go through zoning board of adjustment for
Okay,
approval.
so that's a ZBA decision.
That's right.
And they have to show hardship.
Yes, and then if it's blank on that, then they'd have to ask for a use variance from the zoning board of adjustment, which is a lot harder to ask, of course.
So special exceptions don't actually require a
They
hardship
don't
to be
require
proven.
hardship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A variance does.
That's
They
right.
just have to meet certain criteria.
Okay.
But that was what you said the other night, they would have two
Yeah.
categories of the exceptions.
Yes,
One was
yeah, so then
like-
there's the primary, well, at least today's, we have primary and secondary
Second,
kind of
okay.
Consider.
criteria that they consider, zoning board of adjustment considers.
So on this screen, you've got two really good examples of some of those limitations that are getting built in for land uses, check cashing and liquor stores. And we are going through to make sure those limited uses all have these standards outlined with them. We have found that some do not, so we're having to go back and fix it. But no check cashing use shall be located within 1,000 feet of another. Another check cashing use, a sexually oriented business, a tobacco or vape shop, a liquor store, or a residential use in a residential district. And so that's huge, and it's something that we haven't had in our zoning before. That whole idea of you can't have this use near a residential use within 1,000 feet of a residential use or a residential district. And so it will be uses like check cashing, liquor stores, tobacco or vape shops, sexually oriented businesses, and we've made a longer list of things that we have to make sure are called out specifically so that they have these dimensional restrictions on them.
Is there a chance that you'll review that list again, just to, I saw some uses there, I'd be like a little uncomfortable,
Yes.
related to Springbrook. And there's some, Springbrook's kind of unique, because it's so close to this commercial.
It is.
I just saw some things that I kind of going, yeah, I think I'd not want that there. So I'm just curious, is there another bite of that apple till we can?
Of the restricted land uses,
Yeah.
there would be, absolutely. And I think also I guess while we're talking, what are some of those uses that made you kind of go, ugh? Just because that will be something that the planning staff is looking at right now to bring back to you pretty shortly.
Yeah. Well, one thing that comes to mind too is that the size of these lots is small,
Yeah.
smallish, and it's clear that some of the permitted uses would not accommodate a funeral home,
Right.
for instance, because there wouldn't be sufficient parking and spaces and all that. And that doesn't necessarily translate to something we would want to change in the code, but that would be a consideration in this specific unique property and the way that Bill's saying.
Okay.
I mean, a gas station there would concern me if I were a neighbor, for instance. Some of the vehicle repair, some of the other kinds of
Tire shops.
tire shops,
Mechanic
some of the,
shops.
yeah. some
We
of
have
the
had so many discussions
borderline
about tire
industrial
shops.
almost,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
kind
you've
of,
also
uses.
got back to our buffer conversations.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
if you're gonna have a 35 or whatever, I mean, that cuts into that lot pretty good, and then what's reality going to be to build any commercial use there? That's why I'm kind of like, this is so unique because of the width of the lot, call it width, and then of course the length. It's just,
Well, and it's very likely that, and this is part of that same discussion we had back in 2017, the property, if it is to be redeveloped, will have to be consolidated through subdivision. There's just no way to build on it as it currently is. It will have to be consolidated, new subdivision lines drawn potentially, or they could just consolidate it into one lot. I think it's important to remember that we don't buffer off of public right-of-ways. So the only place that, and let me pull,
I think I'm trying to think, I think a motel was a use as
a
well.
hotel would be, yes.
In GC, it would
in
be
a
allowed.
GC. So the property, you know, you've got up here the entry road into Springbrook. The only piece of property that was not rezoned to BN was this corner piece here. So the buffer would be 35 feet off of that line, 35 feet off of this line, and then there would be the perimeter parking requirements that we require a 10-foot perimeter planting strip around parking areas. So if anybody pulls buildings off and builds them, you know, let's just even talk about the original site plan that was shown. There were a few buildings that were pulled off with parking around and an entry point. I forget where the entry point was, probably down here if I recall, away from this. But there wouldn't be a 35-foot buffer on this portion of the property, nor would there be a 35-foot buffer here, or a 10-foot, or not a 10-foot, a 20-foot. We settled on 20 feet, I wrote that down, 20 feet and a wall along either of those.
So these homes would be potentially facing a commercial.
Yeah, and that was part of the big discussion from 2017 too.
Right.
Yeah.
When we said no. Right?
The commission did vote to not recommend in 2017.
Right.
Ultimately, city council did with that condition.
But the city council did it with the pretense that there would be a wall and a buffer at that time.
Just with the.
And then the
that would be
PUD.
With the PUD, yes, that was the condition that the city council placed on it in 2017.
And no entrance from the back, it all had to come off of Albright Road. I've seen the letter, and I remember it real well.
What was the buffer on that? What was the buffer?
In the
wall.
PUD, it was a wall and a 10 or 20-foot buffer on the back side.
Okay,
And you had to come off of Albright Road, you couldn't come in.
You couldn't
from
come
the
in,
back of the
okay.
neighborhood.
But it was still, the PUD was for residential,
Right, and
but
Right.
not.
they never
It wasn't commercial,
presented,
right, that's right.
a PUD was never presented
Right.
for the property.
Right.
It was just that if we were to do
It
a
was
PUD,
conditioned then.
this
Yes.
is what the site plan might look like. And so there was never anything that was presented.
That's what we try to tell people all the time.
Yep.
is when we rezone something, it's rezoned. And when we rezoned it back then as a PUD, it was to be built as we were told it was going to be built. And after a while, it goes away. And that's the reason you have a hard time trying to rezone something, because these developers don't do what they say
They
they
don't,
do.
Right.
yeah, they don't-
Oh, and that's why, I mean, I think this property is one of those examples of, it is the shining example for me why conditional rezonings are tough.
Good idea.
And
Because,
state law does not allow you to
correct,
rezone something for a time period, and if it's not developed, it goes back to the original rezoning, so that's the reason it's so hard to rezone anything.
that's right. So I know if you've got any questions for Ms. Barth, we did have one more comment on Springbrook that I think,
Let's hear the other
They wanna speak?
comments, and anybody wants to speak, let's hear it.
yeah. So Ms. Smith has a comment as well. Comment of concern, thinks the zoning should be neighborhood commercial. Let me, it's a long one, it's a good one. Please change the general commercial zoning that Planning Division has assigned to the 5.61 acre rezoned tract in Springbrook neighborhood to neighborhood commercial. General commercial zoning is not appropriate for commercial development in a neighborhood. According to the proposed framework zoning districts, the appropriate zoning for the development in a neighborhood is neighborhood commercial. In section 24457, pages 494 through 495, general commercial, no mention of the word neighborhood or neighborhoods appear in the description of the zoning type. GC is intended for the development of a wide range of non-residential uses, emphasis on non-residential, that may be developed in conjunction with residential uses, permitted only above a single story of a building that has only non-residential uses on its ground floor. The maximum building height for GC is 60 feet, roughly 2.5 times the width of the streets in Springbrook, and allows for a 4-story building. Conversely, commercial uses are prominent in the purpose section of Section 24459, pages 4100 through 4101, neighborhood commercial. The purpose of neighborhood commercial provides for a limited range of small-scale commercial uses within or at the edge of residential neighborhoods, intended to ensure that uses, development intensities, and development forms are consistent with this pedestrian-friendly and neighborhood scale. Footnote 408 on page 4100 asserts that NC supports human-scale neighborhood-serving commercial development that is appropriate within the context of existing residential neighborhoods. The maximum building height for NC is 35 feet, maximum 2 stories, a far more appropriate building height for development that would be across a street of approximately 24 plus feet from 13 houses that face the rezoned tract and one whose east side does. The NC zoning designation provides some protection of neighborhoods that have commercial development right at their doorsteps. The GC zoning designation includes no provision of any kind for protecting a neighborhood from the level development allowed in a GC district because GC development is not meant to be situated in a neighborhood. Please do not put aside the dictates of the framework zoning draft document for development in neighborhoods in favor of a zoning that is neither compatible with nor appropriate for neighborhoods. In the City Council meeting of July 25th, 2017, Mr. Richard Henry said, "We are seeking to rezone as BN neighborhood commercial districts. It's business neighborhood. We're not seeking a BH zoning, highway-related commercial districts, or anything of higher density or use. We're looking for the neighborhood designation. Please do not approve a zoning designation that is general commercial on the rezoned tract in Springbrook that could have a seriously negative impact on Springbrook, and I suggest a negative impact on the city in the long term. Please hold Springbrook Investments for the statements they made expressly to convince the City Council to grant the rezoning of 1/5 of the Springbrook neighborhood in July of 2017.
I think it's also important to note that there's a school right there as well. It's awfully close to, I mean, a few blocks away, but there, there is school traffic and some of that is a consideration too. I'm inclined to say neighborhood commercial is.
Well, I'm going to stand by what I've always stood by in all of these, is that I don't disagree with comments, but the property owner, they have rights too. I mean, I think if they want to sit down and agree to it, I think all parties need to be on the same page. That's been my position on all of these. It's like we did tonight. If Mr. Hudson, he was okay with the changes and staff was, and if staff told me that owners of these properties were in agreement with this change, I'd be like, sure, but they're not here, are they? Is there a representative of owners of these properties?
There's not tonight.
I mean, I think if I'm sitting at home and I've got property and y'all make a change on me, I'm gonna be like, wait a minute. That's just, I mean, if they, I think they need to come together on it. And if staff and everybody's in agreement, then sure. I agree with a lot of their statements. I think we talked about the word about the uses that could be there. But again, I mean, I want to stay consistent, and I think all parties have got to be on the same page.
I want to be consistent too, but I was led to believe in 2017 that the property was going to be developed with buffers and certain safety factors added when it was a PUD, and it wasn't. So now, I think we need to make it neighborhood commercial if that's the most protective, because that's what I was led to believe in 2017. It was going to be a protected property that the city would oversee how it was built, planning and zoning at that time, and it's been 7 years and nothing's happened and they haven't developed it yet. And I think neighborhood commercial, and if I could make it even more protective than that, if we had something else, I'd vote for that.
Well, the property owner could be here
Could be, sure.
if he or she chose to.
I agree with neighborhood commercial.
I do too. I agree with neighborhood commercial.
And I also would like to say that a business this close to a residential area, a business that would stay open after hours or too late would raise a lot of concerns.
Yeah.
I probably should stop while I'm ahead, but when we allowed in the past for PUDs, for property to be rezoned because it was a PUD, and it hadn't been developed, then I feel like I've been deceived a little bit. So when we rezone something, it's rezoned and it puts pressure not only on us, but planning and zoning, because we've told someone, yeah, you can do it as X, Y, Z, and then they come back and don't do anything, and we can't do anything about it because it's rezoned. If they sell it, or if they decide to develop it in a different way, we've rezoned it and it's rezoned. We put a PUD on this because we were told it was gonna be done one way. Now, if they decide not to, they want something besides neighborhood commercial, then they can bring it back to planning and zoning or the ZBA or somebody, the city council or whoever. But let them do the footwork and convince us they're doing something special.
So, remind me what it was before it was zoned
Yes,
for the rezoned?
The neighborhood was zoned R2.
Okay.
So,
So this is a more permissive use than it was prior to the rezoning for the PUD?
and neighbor,
NC?
Yes.
Yes, it would be.
Right, so,
but it's not as bad as what we're looking at now, correct?
correct. It's
So we're actually,
splitting the baby?
yeah. Which to me seems right in that middle sweet spot, you know, of providing protection, if that's the main concern, you know, because I agree, I'm concerned about stuff staying open late, you know, we just don't know what can go there if we allow that more open zoning, in this case, commercial zoning. That's concerning to me in terms of protecting the neighbors.
So it sounds like we're hearing a motion to grant the neighborhood commercial from the majority of the commission.
So moved.
Second.
Okay? I want to take a voice vote on this just because
That's
I think
fine.
that's necessary.
Okay.
Mr. Dooley? Making
Voted
the change to.
To
Change.
neighborhood.
Yes is
Yes,
in favor.
Yes.
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 No.
Okay. We will note that the proposal is to change to NC. And that will be noted, or that will be seen in the wrap-up meetings ahead. It's them. You got to talk to them.
Sorry?
Ms. Smith is public comment.
Susie Smith, 17 Springbrook. I was a member of the steering committee for Framework, and I wanted to make just a couple of comments. One is that this has already been rezoned commercial. It's already commercial. The question, which you have answered, and thank you very much for doing so, is the kind of commercial. And general commercial is completely inappropriate inside a neighborhood with houses facing it and people living in those houses. Sometimes what I wish, and I know your job gets kind of, oh my goodness, this is the same old, but in every decision that you make, there are people's lives who are affected. And this was one of them, and that's the reason that it was so contentious, is because it was in a neighborhood, not on the periphery of a neighborhood. It was in the neighborhood. Additionally, when that zone or that tract is developed, 20 families are going to have to find someplace else to live. There is one rental property on that block that is not rented. All the rest of them are rented. There is a lady who was living on that, in her house that she's living in right now. She had been living there 9 years in 2017. She's still there. There's a property owner on the edge of that property. She's still there. There are people on the backside who have been renting for 7, 8, 9 years. So these are not fly-by-night students or fly-by-night renters. They are people who live in these houses over long periods of time. Now, one other thing I would like to do is to say, PCC members Robert Reynolds, Phyllis Odom, Vince Dooley, Mike Wright, and Dina Price cast votes to recommend that the City Council deny the Springbrook investment rezoning petitions they heard in 2015 and 2017. On July the 25th, 2017, City Councilors Phyllis Odom, Raven Howard Williams, and then Councilor Sonia McKinstry heeded the Planning Commission's recommendation and voted to deny the rezoning petition. Thank you. Thank you. Please do right by Springbrook, and I'm so glad you did. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one more that signed up to speak. Royce Ewan? Good? Okay. All right. Staff, we have anything else on the, we need to address?
I just need to finish typing.
Sorry?
I need to finish typing.
Okay. Sure. Is there anything else on the,
No, just to go over the schedule for the rest of it.
okay.
Joan Barth, 5541 Woodbury Lane. Thank you for your consideration tonight. We're so appreciative of that. I had prepared comments, you know, and so I feel a little denied, but not really. But I did want to give you the front page comments on that. It was filed May 19th, 2017, and this was the application for the PUD. And I think I want you to have it, because if you read through that narrative, it will give you some greater confidence in your decision, is not only upholding what was right for the neighborhood, but what the developer had promised us. Thank you.
Thank you. Staff?
We got ahead of you, huh?
Got more?
Let me go.
Let's say.
Let me go through the schedule with you as we wrap things up.
Zach, on what we just did, it's got to go before the council. It will go before the council as our suggestion to move it to neighborhood commercial. At that time, could the developer come back and do
Absolutely.
something? So any changes we make in these last 5 or 6 months we've been meeting on this stuff, if anybody's got some concerns, they need to continue to watch this, because it could come back. We're making suggestions, the council passes.
Yes, and we'll have wrap-up meetings at the end. You know, so let's talk next steps really quickly. Our last MAP meeting is in June on the 26th. We're looking at the Highway 69 South Corridor along with Skyland Boulevard Corridor. And so you'll see a lot of car dealerships and various and sundry things in the June meeting. And then we will start to wrap up in July and August. So there are opportunities again down the road, and it's like the introductory statements say that Mr. Wright reads every meeting. This isn't over till it's over. And so anybody who has a vested interest in a piece of property does need to continue to be watching and making sure that they are providing commentary ultimately to their city council members, because the council will be the final authority. Just like any rezoning and just like any zoning text amendment, though we haven't had one in a while, the city council is the final authority and the planning commission is a recommending body. So those are important things to note as we see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm just going to keep reiterating it because it's not over till it's over. That's the second time I've said that tonight. So As always, framework.tuscaloosa.com is your one-stop shop for all things framework. Please review the draft text, review the maps, give comments, submit those comments. Maybe don't use Firefox. We're trying to figure out if there's an issue with Firefox. And then view the meeting schedule as well. If you have any questions, the planning staff is ready to serve you and answer those questions. Mr. Wright, anything else?
I'm aware of.
It's all you, sir.
Meeting adjourned.